Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy BULLBOYKENNELS. Just gonna do a comparison between Vegas Pro 10 and Vegas Pro 11. Some of y'all know I recently just upgraded to Vegas Pro 11. Reason for me doing so is because I do have two AMD cards, and I would have liked to have been able to take use of the GPU acceleration if it was beneficial to me. Now keep in mind, I do have, my main system, which is my, my gaming rig or whatever you want to call it, the shit I play on, which is where currently my two AMD cards are in, which eventually once I rebuild my AMD rig, I'll probably be sticking these two cards back in there, and that system would probably end up benefiting from the AMD cards, even though it's only going to use one card for rendering, and it does not use crossfire setups or SLI setups. So if you have multiple cards, Sony Vegas Pro 11 at the time of this video will only use one GPU to do the rendering. So keep that in mind. But first, let's start with Vegas Pro 10, and right now I have a 15-minute clip. Well, it's the same clip just over and over to make 15 minutes, just as you can see it says 15 minutes. And I'll show you what I do as far as when I do my renders. Once all my clips are in here, I highlight all my videos, then I just go to, I right click, go to switches, and I disable resample. I do that to every single video that I render. Now the other thing, since I record with fraps at 60 frames per second, 1080p, my files are going to be pretty large for about a minute to minute and a half. They're about, 4 gig files. So you can imagine how much space 15 minutes worth of video takes. Now for my project settings, this is how I set it up. I have a custom setup here. It's 1920 by 1080 because that's what my frame size is. 60 frames per second, progressive scan. The changes that I make, and now this will definitely increase your render times significantly. So if you have a slow processor, do not change this part. By default, it's on 8-bit. I change it to 32-bit floating point full range. And the gamma, for some reason, Sony Vegas tends to make your videos dark, and it's by default it's on 1.0 linear. I set it to 2.222. As far as for the resolution, I leave it on best. The motion blur, I leave it on Gaussian, and the deinterlace method, well, it's progressive. I don't need to deinterlace anything, so I set that to none. And then I make sure that adjust source media to better match the render settings is checked off. Those are my settings. Like I said, if you have a slow processor, leave these two at default, because if not, whoo, man, your render times are going to increase dramatically, and you may not be happy about it. So those are my project settings. Now, for my render settings, this is how I always render. I use the Sony AVC, and I actually have a custom one here because I like to render out to 720p, 30 frames per second. And I'll show you how my my settings are. Now for the format, I use AVC. Frame size, of course, high definition, 1280 by 720. Allow source to adjust frame, I leave that unchecked. The profile, I've always used baseline. That's just what I use. So keep that in mind. Now you could use main, which on the newer version, that's what I have to use is main. For the encoding, CAV LC, which on Vegas 11, I end up using, I believe it's Quebec. The frame rate's 29.99, 29.97. Of course, progressive pixel, aspect ratio 1.0, bitrate 16,000 or 16 million in this case. The encoding modes, I leave it at automatic. For my audio, it's AAC 4800 kilohertz at a 128 bit, or bit rate, bits per second, whatever. Of course, stereo mode system, it's going to be MP4 file format. For my video rendering quality, I use best instead of the default use project settings. I always set it to best. That's just my particular settings. And then I go ahead and render it out. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and render this out, and I'll come back to it once the render is over. Let me just call this Vegas 10 test, and of course it's CPU only because it doesn't take advantage of my AMD cards. And I'll go ahead and I'll render that out using my custom setting that I use. Okay, so as you can see, my rendering has completed, and that 15-minute video with the settings that I use for my videos, my render settings, and my project settings, the video took 10 minutes and 1 second, which is about right. It takes like 10 minutes. I thought it was like 11 minutes, but it's actually 10 minutes. So I am rendering faster than real time using the settings that that I use. Okay, now with Sony Vegas 11, there's a few things that are different because things are put in different places. So to try to make that test as fair as possible, I will do the render setting for that as well, which in the Vegas 11, I'd actually have to use the main concept AVC, and I do have a template made for that, and I'll show you those settings as well. And like I said, for that one, it is 1280 by 720. The profile is on main rather than baseline. Frame rate still the same, 29.97. Progressive, aspect ratio 1.0. Number of reference frames 2. Now the variable bitrate, I don't use the constant bitrate because it doesn't let me set it to 16 million or whatever. So I use the variable bitrate and I set them both to 16. I do not use the 2-pass because it's just really not needed. You could do it. It will sometimes make the file a bit smaller, but the render times are longer. For the audio, 4800 hertz, bitrate 128. For AAC, and for the video rendering quality, best. So those are my settings that I use for that. So I'll go ahead and use this here template, and I believe this was the one, right? Yep, CPU only. Now the first one was Sony AVC. This one is going to be main concept. Well, let me just put that on here. And it's only with the CPU, so I'll go ahead and render that out, and once it's done, we'll get back to it. Now the reason I'm not recording it while it's rendering is because I am using fraps, and I don't want it to be using any additional resources that it doesn't have to be using. That way you can get a good idea of how long each test takes compared to version 10 and version 11. Okay, and now as you can see, using the main concept, AVC codec, the same video with the same exact project settings, which with virtually the same type of render settings that I use for AVC, even though they're slightly different. This here video took 15 minutes and 35 seconds for a 15-minute Fraps video that again is recorded at 1080p 60 frames per second with the project settings that I use. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into Vegas 11, and we'll check out how that does with and without the GPU acceleration. And I think you'll be quite surprised to see as to the results that we get out of this. So give me a second and I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so here we are in Vegas Pro 11, and just to give you a quick recap and also a little bit of additional information. With the Sony Vegas 11, when you go into your options, to your preferences, you got to go to the video tab. And right now everything is set to default except for the GPU acceleration of video processor, because it did recognize my cards, or card, because it does not use dual graphic cards or triple cards or quadruple cards. It would only use a single graphic card, and it's going to use the first one that's set to the monitor that is being viewed on. So I have it set to off instead of on. That is the difference that I've done with that. Again, the project settings, as you can see, I pretty much still have the same settings here. Well, actually these same settings: 1920 with 1080, progressive 1.0, 60 frames per second, 32-bit floating point, full range, and then 2.222 video, best, Gaussian, deinterlace method, none, and of course I have this checked. So my project settings are exactly the same. Again, this video clips about 15 minutes 1 second, 15 minutes 2 seconds, but nonetheless the settings I use are exactly the same. I disable resample for all my video clips. I always do that. And since I already have Vegas 10 on here, it did import my settings for my render. Now it is a bit different on how it shows it, so we'll go to Sony AVC, bring this down, and here's the setting that it did import. But however, since everything's moved around now, as you can see, things are a bit different. So we'll go to customize template just so you can see. The format is AVC. It is still 1280 by 720. The profile is main. As you can see, there's no baseline, which is why I had to use main. The entropy coding is CashApp, because I don't have the other option, as in Vegas 11. I mean Vegas 10. Frame rate still the same, 29.97. Field order progressive. Pixel aspect 1.0, bitrate 16,000, and encoding mode automatic. That's I just have it set to automatic, simply because I have GPU acceleration turned off. The audio AAC 4800 hertz, 128 bitrate, stereo sound, format MP4, and of course video rendering quality best. So really the only differences between this and Vegas 10 is that the profile, instead of being baseline, is main, and I believe it's called Calv something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but now it's on CashApp, or CashApp, however you want to pronounce it. Those are the main differences in it. So we'll go ahead and now render this one out, and we'll see how this one here turns out. So let me call this AVC CPU, and if I can type right, CPU only. So we'll go ahead and render this out and see how long that takes. Okay, so in Sony Vegas 11, we have already completed our Sony AVC rendering. Now keep in mind that this render setting was actually more similar to what the main concept setting was, rather than the actual Sony AVC template that I use, because the settings have got moved around as far as what you're able to use. And this one here took 8 minutes and 12 seconds for the Sony AVC, whereas with the other it took 10 minutes and 1 second. So I actually saved close to 2 minutes in render time. Now we're going to go ahead and do the main concept, and we'll see how long that one there is going to take. Again, these are kind of moved around in the different spots, so kind of have to get used to it a bit. Again, I have the custom template made for this, and we'll go ahead and take a look at this one as well. Now again, we have the HD 720p. Profile is main. Now this one we could select baseline, which is how the Sony AVC codec has, but we're just going to use main to see how it compares to the Sony AVC, which only allows me to use main rather than baseline as far as version 11 is concerned. Again, frame rate's 29.97, progressive scan, pixel aspect ratio 1.0, number of reference frames 2. However, for the constant bit rate, it only allows me to do like 14,000. Then I think the next one is like 20,000. So I use the variable bit rate of 16,000 for the maximum and average. The encode mode, again, since I have GPU assist turned off, I leave it on automatic. And what's different in version 11 is now that they now have the option to enable progressive download. Now this will make your file a bit bigger than without it, but for demonstration purposes only, I'm going to leave it enabled because it is a very good feature to have, especially when streaming video from the web. The audio, it is AAC, 48 Hertz, bitrate 128. System, we don't have anything because we're not using the GPU at all. Video rendering quality is going to be best. So that is the setting that we will be using. So let me go ahead and make my changes on here. Again, this is the main concept. Oops, if I can spell correctly. Hold on. GPU. Not GPU. CPU only. So we'll go ahead and now render this out and see how long that one takes. Okay folks, now we have finished rendering the main concept render setting that I used, which again, I try to make it as very exact and as similar as the one in Vegas 10. And on here, it took 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Compared to 15 minutes and some odd seconds. Can't remember the exact number, but I'll have it at the end of the notes. So, virtually it took half the time using the same, pretty much the same exact settings and codec versus Vegas 10 as it did with Vegas 11. And the Sony AVC took almost 2 minutes less than it did in Sony Vegas Pro 10. Now, the final two encodings that we're going to be doing, or renders, it will be, with Sony Vegas Pro 11. Now, the difference is now we're going to enable the GPU acceleration, and we're only going to render with the GPU only. We're not going to be using the CPU at all. Now, in order to do this, I will need to change the setting in Sony Vegas and then restart Vegas, and then we'll come right back to that. Okay folks, now we're back in Sony Vegas Pro 11. Again, like I said, in order to make the change, you do have to restart the system, which is what I went ahead and did. Go back to the video tab. As you can now see, GPU acceleration is turned on. So this way it'll actually use the graphic card rather than the processor in order to do the the rendering of the video. Just a quick recap. So you see that my settings, project settings, are still the same. 1920 by 1080, progressive scan, aspect ratio 1.0, 60 frames a second, 32-bit floating point full range. The gamma is 2.222. The rendering quality is best. Motion blur Gaussian. Deinterlace none, because, well, quite frankly, this footage isn't interlaced, so don't need to use that. So you can disable that. But remember, if you have a slow processor, an older processor, leave these two options here, pixel format and composite and gamma, at their defaults. If not, it will significantly increase your render time. So I can't stress that enough. Now, if you got a fast processor, a newer processor, you know, that can handle it, you know, hey, go for it. You know, quality is going to be better anyways. But if not, leave it at its default. Again, still the same video clip, you know, just the same video all the way around. If I go to my switches, sample, resample is disabled because I do that on all my videos. And we'll go ahead and do the same render. We'll keep it in the same order that we've been doing it, Sony AVC. So let me find that here. Sony AVC. Now we will change one setting, which is going to be the encode mode, because we want to use GPU only now that we have the GPU assist enabled. All the other settings are still the same, as you can see. You know, we can check for GPU. It says OpenCL is available and best. So again, the only change that we made is the encode mode, which is we will now be using the GPU. Go ahead and hit OK. That way, that change will go into effect. And let me go ahead and give this a name. This is the AVC and GPU, because that's what we'll be using. Now this will actually end up taking longer, which I was quite surprised. And the reason I say that is because the graphic card that I'm using is a XFX Radeon 6970. Now I do have dual cards, but again, Sony Vegas will only use one graphic card, and it's only going to use the graphic card that's set to the monitor that it's being done on, or viewed on for that matter. So let's go ahead and hit render, and once that time completes, I'll come back to the video. Okay, so as you can see in Vegas Pro 11, using the AVC codec, which, as I said, I try to get the settings as exact as possible as I could with Vegas 10. Using the GPU only, this took 13 minutes and 47 seconds. 13 minutes 47 seconds. Without CPU only was 812 versus Vegas 10, which is of course the CPU only, was 10 minutes 1 second. So clearly using the GPU is not saving me time at all. It's actually adding more time, even though it's still quicker than real time. And that's just I just wasn't expecting that, but that's the case. So now we're gonna go ahead and try the main concept. We're gonna go ahead and do that render, and again, this is gonna be using the GPU only, and we'll see how that test there fares. Again, for the encode mode, we're going to set it to GPU only. Everything else is still the same, as the previous render where it was only the CPU, with the exception of now we're only going to use the GPU. Again, audio is still the same, 4800 hertz, 128 bit for the bit rate. For the system, we see that OpenCL is available. Video render quality is going to be best. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And let me rename this here file, so that way we know it's GPU only. And go ahead and render this one out using the main concept codec. And just so you can see, it is on the main concept. And let's go ahead and render that and see how that goes. And once it's done, I'll be right back. Okay, so we've already finished the Sony Vegas 11. Again, this is the main concept codec using only the GPU, and this here took 11 minutes and 14 seconds. Now I'll be back with the conclusion. All right. Okay, so in conclusion, we found that with Sony Vegas 10 or Sony Vegas Pro 10 and Sony Vegas Pro 11, whether it be with or without the GPU acceleration, And again, with the test, I did it with only using the GPU itself, and then the other test with only doing the CPU itself. So let's just go ahead and do a quick recap on the numbers. With the Sony Vegas Pro 10, the Sony AVC codec using the template that I use, which I try to keep it as exact as possible throughout all the tests, even though one or two of the settings do have to change because of the way Sony Vegas itself has changed. In Vegas Pro 10, the Sony AVC took 10 minutes 1 second, whereas with Sony Vegas 11 Pro, using only the CPU as well, took 8 minutes 12 seconds. And then again in Sony Vegas 11 Pro, using only the GPU, took 13 minutes and 47 seconds. So with only the GPU, it actually took longer by almost 4 minutes than compared to Sony Vegas 10. So that, you know, that may be a good thing for some, may be a bad thing for others. Then the other test I did, which was with the main concept, pretty much trying to use the exact same settings across the board. In Sony Vegas 10 Pro, it took 15 minutes and 35 seconds. So very close to real time. It was off by 35 seconds. If not, it'd have been real time. In Sony Vegas 11 Pro, also using the main concept, took 6 minutes and 40 seconds, only using the CPU as I did in Vegas 10, which was virtually, you know, less than half the time versus Vegas 10. Now, when I used the GPU only, now that took 11 minutes and 14 seconds, which was faster than Vegas 10 using the main concept, using the same exact template that I would normally use. But it was almost twice as long than if I used only the CPU within Vegas Pro 11 itself. So those are the numbers that I have. You know, again, it's based on my project settings. I use higher settings, deeper color rate, ratio and all that. So that will increase my times dramatically. If I set it to the default, like I said, then my times are going to be way less than they currently are. And considering that I'm just using the CPU only, getting the render times that I have, which is way less than real time, well, not less than real time, but way quicker than real time, that is beastly. I mean, that's like beastly type of shit. So anyways, that's my test. Hope you all enjoyed it. You know, maybe it might help you decide which way you want to go, depending on whether or not you're using a graphic card, or if you're not using a graphic card, would it be beneficial for you to upgrade to Sony Vegas 11 from version 10, or from maybe a previous version itself. Till then, this is your boy BULLBOYKENNELS, and as always, keep them scratching. Peace.